How are you doing, everybody? Welcome into the SFS channel. In this episode, I'll be walking you through my top 30 fantasy football running backs for Week 7 action. Now, Thursday Night Football occurred last night. This video is taking place a little bit beforehand, so you're going to have the information accessible for what Alvin Kamara, Eno Benjamin, some of these other running backs that we're talking through for tonight's game. Obviously, just top 30 players. James Conner's been ruled out already. We'll be chatting through all that stuff and more. You'll know what's going on, though. So I'll give a quick take for those players, but quickly move along as if this were posted a day sooner, which is when I usually come out with it. So keep that stuff in mind today as you're watching today's episode. As always, if you're new around here, smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn the bell on so you're never late for a new piece of content. And with that being said, let's dive on in. All right, I said this in the other episode, but again, we have teams on bye this week. I felt that made some of these position groups, especially receivers, a bit lower. You're missing some really high caliber guys there. For running backs this week, we'll be without Miles Sanders. We'll be without Devin Singletary. We'll be without Dalvin Cook and Darrell Henderson / Cam Akers, who I kind of joked about earlier this week could have 2 bye weeks this season. So as always, I'll dive through the tiers list here for those of you that are new around here, haven't watched an episode before. The elite running back ones, the guys that you most want in your lineups this week. Strong running back ones, guys I'm confident that'll finish top 12 here or within that RB1 range for 12-team formats, which I use as kind of a basis here. Bubble RB1s have a case to be made for why they're a top 12 player or why they're not. That's why they're on the bubble there. And then rinse and repeat for 13 through 24 for the elite running backs. 2 through the bubble RB2 categories, and then RB3s are simply lower end options that you don't necessarily want to have in those lineups, but they do have some utility depending on your circumstances and needs. So with that being said, let's hop on in. All right, so the elite running back ones tier for this week goes 5 deep for me, as always, left to right, starting with number 1, Austin Ekeler here, who's been playing with his hair on fire as of late here the last 3 games. Kind of a funny joke there, considering that he basically has no hair. But for Austin Ekeler here, this is a guy who has 6 touchdowns total in his last 3 outings. His first 3 games, he had 0. So you're talking about a guy here who is now on pace for 1 touchdown per game. Obviously getting very close to the percentages of touchdown conversions that he had in 2021, where he scored 20 total. Again, this year on pace for 17 in an 18-game season. So across those 3 games you just talked about here, he scored 19 or more points in each contest, that via half PPR scoring. Love to see all that stuff here. It's been phenomenal production from him as of late, and we're excited about seeing that. For Saquon Barkley, and by the way, in PPR formats, Austin Ekeler is currently the running back 1. For Saquon Barkley, he is currently the PPR running back 2. This is a guy who just recently got passed this week by Ekeler. However, he has had 10 or more points in 100% of his games. Elite consistency there so far. And a guy who's had 17 or more points in 5 out of his 6 outings. This week, he's got the Jaguars, I should mention. Ekeler's got the Seahawks this week. Feeling very comfortable with these guys as always. Nick Chubb, the standard running back 1 here, a guy who scored 7 touchdowns this year and who really his only bad game was when he got Bill Belichick this past week. We knew the Patriots were going to come in and take away the Browns' most viable offensive threat. That's Nick Chubb here. They shut down the run game, made Jacoby Brissett pass the ball. He knows Jacoby Brissett very well, of course. He drafted him out of NC State back in the day. It was a debacle for the Browns. It was a messy game. It was sloppy. They didn't score many points. I think they lost 38-13, I want to say. It was a bloodbath, and that was kind of to be expected. So for Nick Chubb, not concerned about that situation whatsoever. CMC here taking on Tampa Bay, my 4th running back of the week, I should mention. The Browns. I'm sorry I forget to mention the matchups for these elite guys. Really, I just like to focus on the production for these players, because for the most part, the opposing competition is not necessarily the largest indicator of their success because they're being used at such a high level. But for CMC, he's got Tampa Bay this week. Now, this matchup does push him down a little bit further than, his ceiling for me would be the number 3 position this week. However, I do feel that stout Tampa run defense does knock him a little bit. He's a fantastic pass catcher, though. This team literally can't move the football offensively without him, so he is absolutely needed for this group and for this team. He's had 13.7 fantasy points per game or more each contest, and has played 80% of the team's offensive snaps in every game. Check, check, check. Great things from CMC there. And Derrick Henry, I will mention as well, CMC. He's been mentioned in trade rumors, which could impact his fantasy situation and outlook long term this year, but until that actually comes to fruition, we're not going to dive too much into that for today's episode. And then Derrick Henry here, taking on the Indianapolis Colts. Henry is a player who has had 3 straight games of 20 or more points in fantasy scoring here. He is coming off of a bye. Hopefully he's freshened up a little bit. And he's playing a Colts team that when he played back in week 4, he averaged over 5 yards per carry against. So great efficiency there. Of course, a dominant goal line back and the focal point of his Titans offense. Alrighty, here we go with the strong running back ones group. So starting out with Leonard Fournette this week, taking on Carolina. I expect this Buccaneers team, favored by 11 points on the road, to dominate and control this matchup. And Lenny has been insanely impressive, having 5 or more receptions 4 weeks in a row. So the last month has been extremely productive for him, catching passes out of the backfield. He's checking more and more boxes for me as the season goes on. If you guys bought low for him recently, you are feeling great about that right now. Josh Jacobs here, guy number 7 this week, taking on the Houston Texans. Another touchdown favorite, not nearly as great of an extent as Tampa is this week, but still feeling very, very good about what Jacobs represents for this offense. He's having his best statistical season of his career, averaging 5 or more yards per carry in 4 out of his 5 matchups this season, and catching 5 or more passes in 3 games this year. So very, very good productivity numbers from Josh Jacobs here. Really liking what I'm seeing. They're being more dependent and relying on him on a more frequent basis. That is good stuff to see here, and encouraging for Jacobs owners, who's been popping the last couple of weeks. Breece Hall, my number 8 running back for week 7 here. He is the total RB1 package right now. Since his breakout, he's had 3 straight games of 20 or more touches in this offense. And he's productive. He is flat, simple, no getting around it. Productive as a rusher, as a receiver, on the goal line. He does everything you ask him to do. He has surged up rankings in an ascending offense. Everything is here that you want to see from Breece Hall. Joe Mixon, my RB9 for this week, a player who is a workhorse, but I feel has not hit his ceiling to this point in the season. He's had 4 or more targets in 5 out of 6 games this season, so you love to see that critical pass-catching involvement here. But like I said, the ceiling hasn't been nearly as good as expected. Between O-line play, struggles early offensively from Cincinnati, it just hasn't come together and culminated in elite success, but he's got those critical involvement territories taken care of here. He still plays alongside a highly competent quarterback that I feel very comfortable and strong in, leading my offensive attack, so no panicking for me whatsoever on Joe Mixon. I'm completely satisfied and comfortable with what is currently the RB12 in PPR formats. I think that could get better. Ramondre Stevenson here had to knock him down a couple of pegs after recently hearing news that Damian Harris today on Thursday, when recording this episode, was a full participant at practice. So for me, what that means is he's very close to returning here. Obviously bad news for Stevenson owners, as even if Stevenson continues to start and be the lead back for this offense, he's going to see a slip in his overall usage and fantasy production on a per week basis. But they've got Chicago this week. I expect him to totally smoke the Bears. Rookie head coach, second-year quarterback who has enough struggles based on just personnel alone that I think this is going to be a matchup nightmare for the Patriots. And at the end of the day, I think a really good game script will unfold for Stevenson here. And then Alvin Kamara, as I said at the beginning of the video, you've seen him play already. You know what he did. I'm recording this right now on Thursday evening. It is currently T-minus about 55 minutes until kickoff here. So I don't know yet, but I am expecting a team in the Arizona Cardinals that's passing defense has been very stout as of late. I don't think they get too much going besides Chris Olave this week, and there's a chance that he might flop. So I think a heavy emphasis on the ground game, playing a little bit more conservative without, Jameis isn't going to be starting. He is the QB3, I believe, on the depth chart. He'll be active, but, kind of an emergency situation quarterback with Andy Dalton starting. So all things to keep your eye on here. I am modest in my expectations with Kamara for this week, but that'll leave us into our bubble running back ones tier here. All right, bubble running back 1. Very simple here. It is one player. It is Jonathan Taylor. Now, if you're wondering, hey, Gavin, why isn't he higher here? Why are you not respecting the 2021 running back 1 to a greater extent? It isn't that I don't believe in him. It isn't that this matchup is incredibly tough. It is simply that I am more cautious with fantasy injuries, especially as of late. This season, we've really seen an emphasis on ankle injuries impacting fantasy play. So for that reason, I'm more skeptical and pessimistic on his overall production here. Now, I'm rooting for JT. I want to see him do great things this week, but I do think that, like I said, the matchup here for me against Tennessee doesn't really play a big part of things. I guess Jonathan did choose to sit out. That's the report that I just read, an hour or so ago, is that he chose and communicated with the coaching staff not to play in week 6. So I kind of like that. I kind of think that's a positive thing for his health here. You'd rather see him get 100% healthy and be playing at full strength versus kind of gimping around for the rest of the year and, progressing that injury further. So for JT, this is all about risk management with injuries. You're still starting him this week. By no means am I telling you not to do so. I would love to see him be the RB1 overall this week because I've got my hands on some JT shares this year. But I am being a little bit more cautious in my evaluation and expectations because of that ankle, and it will be his first game back here. If, at the end of the day, if he ends up choosing to play, to my knowledge, that hasn't been ruled a guarantee yet for week 7. All right, let's dive into our elite running back 2s now. 3 names in this category. This will be our running backs 13 through 15, starting with Ken Walker. Had his first start of the season in week 6, did very well. 21 rushes, 96 yards, 4.63 yards per carry, and scored a touchdown. It was a great game script. He's got the Chargers this week. I think Seattle can move the ball up and down the field. Maybe he doesn't cash in for a touchdown this week. The Chargers, though, have had a historically terrible red zone defense here over the last 20-plus game sample size. I forget if that streak continues to stand here, but at one point I remember hearing the commentators say it was like 21 straight trips in the red zone resulted in a touchdown for the opposition. So with Walker, you're getting a home run hitter, though. If he doesn't have the most efficient day, hopefully he can rip one huge run that kind of makes a difference here. Again, though, I do expect Seattle, who's been very competent offensively this year, to go out there, score points, and make an impact on this game. Dameon Pierce here, our number 14 running back for this week, off a bye week. He is a player that Lovie Smith said he wants to get the rock to 20 or more times this week on the ground. So that would be really interesting. I think that if we continue to see him used in a workhorse fashion, that's all the more benefit for fantasy owners here. He's been a player that since his breakout, I believe it was a week or two before Breece Hall, he's been incredibly productive. So hopefully that continues here and the hot streak surges forward off that week 6 bye week. They are playing the Raiders this week. Could get into a negative game script. That's a small risk factor of things to consider there. And then DeAndre Swift, he's an elite running back when on the field. But we don't know if he's going to be out there this week. It sounds like reports are indicating he's pushing to be out there and wants to play. However, we don't know if that's going to be the case. It's no guarantee at the end of the day. So we could get another Jamal Williams sighting this week. You might know more by the time you're watching this episode based on when I recorded it. And for Swift here, maybe they don't, fully function and incorporate him back into this team on, week number 1 healthy from that shoulder sprain. So stuff to consider there. Let's dive into the running back 2s. All right, strong running back 2s now. So Aaron Jones kicks us off for today, our 16th ranked running back this week. We've previously gotten a lot of comments about, quote-unquote disrespect for Aaron Jones in these episodes based on where I've ranked him, and hopefully you guys are starting to see that I think that was pretty warranted. This Packers offense has been very, very strugglesome to move the football downfield consistently. And in particular for guys like A.J. Dillon, they've suffered as well, not getting red zone opportunities and critical touches for this team. So for Aaron Jones, last week, he had 12 touches in 14 drives offensively for this team. That's just simply unacceptable play calling by Coach Matt LaFleur, and that needs to change if this offense is going to change and see their overall output improve drastically. So I'm a Packer fan. I've said this in videos where I'm extremely harsh of Aaron Jones. I really like him as a player, but his usage hasn't warranted high levels of fantasy respect right now. That's just simply what it is, and I hate that it is that way, but I keep this cut and dry and really honest with you guys, and I think that this is a buy low opportunity right now, but I also feel that the current productivity at times is unwarranting of a lineup spot. So I'm keeping him in the RB2 discussion. He clearly has RB1 upside, but the way, again, that he's being used today, the time I'm recording this video, weeks 1 through 6, moving into week 7 here, he just hasn't been that guy. So moving into Ezekiel Elliott now, a guy who also has not been that guy. The funny meme, you're not that guy, pal. I'm just going to move on and pretend I didn't say that. Ezekiel Elliott here is our player here at the RB17 position, playing Detroit this week. A juicy old matchup on the ground. You're going to hear some optimistic talk about Tony Pollard in a little bit in the bubble RB2 range. But for Zeke, coming off his best game of the season, averaging over 6 yards per carry, surprisingly, much to my shocking here in week 6 against the Eagles, a very stout defensive front. he went out there and did very well again. And moving into week 7, the matchup is fantastic. You're getting Dak back here. I think hopefully this might not be the week that they blow up offensively, but I think that overall your efficiency and overall scoring per game should improve. So excited about what that means for Zeke. The matchup this week is light. However, I will say that in certain circumstances here, I wouldn't be opposed to selling high. We talked through him in our sell high episode for some players this week. But in some spots, players might want to buy him as well, but, his stock is rising. So Jeff Wilson here, diving into our 18th player, taking on Kansas City there, field goal underdogs at home. I'm simply predicting a 49ers bounce back week here. I don't think they stink it up 2 weeks in a row, especially running the football. If anything, Kyle Shanahan will get that part right here. Jeff was a must start for us last week, scored 0 fantasy points because I believe he rushed for 25 yards and fumbled the ball away, so lost his 2 points of production through that. And if you know 49ers football and 49ers running backs, they don't catch passes much, so especially their lead backs. So for Jeff Wilson, it was a terrible day, his worst of the season. And moving into this matchup, I'm hoping they can right the wrong there and kind of right the ship here in terms of that productivity. I think this will be a close contest throughout. As long as Jeff gets enough work and opportunity, 17 to 20 touches here, I think he'll be just fine, put up the numbers we're hoping for. And I think San Francisco will give Kansas City a bit of a run for their money here. Both teams reeling after some unfortunate losses here. It was a worse loss for San Fran, though. Najee Harris taking on the Miami Dolphins. Right now, Miami is 23rd against fantasy running backs, while Najee Harris I still view, because of his terrible offensive line and overall offensive output, I still view him as a touchdown-dependent RB2 play. But I do think this is a team they can move the ball against, and I do think that this is a matchup where he could see one of his better days of efficiency this season, although that might not be saying much here. So there is definitely some risk still associated with it. David Montgomery next in here. This is a team in Chicago, 5th in team run plays per game. They place a high emphasis and focalize running the football and protecting Justin Fields through that manner. This game's script could get really out of hand, though. I think New England is one of the worst matchups this team could have in any circumstance. So there is that huge red flag there, but he has been used in a workhorse fashion multiple times this season. The snap count percentage is consistently above average, so things to like there. And finally, Raheem Mostert here, a guy into his first game back. If you trace back the last 3 contests for Miami, Raheem Mostert has placed consistently his 3 highest usage games of the year. So without Tua here and with those injuries, as of late, he's progressed his involvement in this offense. And in his first game back here, I think that those levels of use can be somewhat consistent and taken advantage of in this matchup where, they might not want to just drop back and pass it a high volume of times in his first contest back on the field. Into my bubble running back twos now. These are players. I think this is definitely a top-heavy position group this week that, I've noticed throughout this point because this group feels very weak to me. As I talked about, we're going to see some optimism here for Tony Pollard. I think that he's a very boom-bust player in general, but I lean more towards a boom game against Detroit this week just because of their overall low-level defensive play this season. So he's going to need to rip a big run. Kind of his trend has been if he hits a big play early, it's a really good game for him, and they can, continue to give him looks. But I think that Zeke is the safer play in this matchup. If you do have a desperate RB2 streaming scenario, though, don't mind Pollard one bit in this offense here. Clyde Edwards-Helaire in this matchup against San Francisco. Again, I think overall my preseason assessment of him will prove to be right. It looked pretty rough there while he was scoring touchdowns at a frantic rate, but now that you've got a guy who in 5 out of 6 matchups, the sample size is increasing here, he's had below a 44% snap share each week or less than or equal to that number, and has had 13 or fewer touches in 5 out of 6 matchups as well. So again, 13 or fewer touches in 5 out of 6 games. So his usage has been very spotty, very sketchy, shaky. He's not a workhorse, seems to be very efficient, has a very specific use case as well for this team. So when he's not scoring touchdowns in random spurts here, you're not going to be getting those fancy lineup-worthy games. B-Rob, Brian Robinson here against the Green Bay Packers. My fear in this matchup isn't the matchup. It's more Antonio Gibson usage. Ron Rivera hinted towards it throughout the week. And I think that his late game stretch of efficient play really swung the tides back in his favor. Now, I'm not saying Gibson's going to take over this backfield. He had plenty of chances to do that already this year. But I do think that it'll take away Robinson's utility to an extent where if he scores a touchdown, he's a fantasy relevant player. If he doesn't, he is not. Moving to Travis Etienne here. He is our 25th ranked running back for this week. This is a very thick bubble RB2 territory here. However, taking on the Giants this week, he's coming off back-to-back elite games in terms of efficiency, 7.1 and 8.6 yards per carry on the ground, respectively. He is the better and more explosive running back in this offense. He needs the touches to back it up, though. Melvin Gordon coming off a 16% snap count percentage game. Kind of rock bottom for Gordon this season. I think that things have been getting pretty shaky, but reportedly him and the thumb Nathaniel Hackett have had their meetings and, hashed out their differences here and had a really productive talk, according to Coach Hackett. And it sounds like Melvin's going to start this week. So while I was bailing ship and, jumping overboard here, getting ready to load up my Latavius Murray shares for this week, it looks like Melvin might be back in order here against the Jets in this game. So keep your eye on that situation, but definitely, got him back in the discussion for a weekly lineup-worthy play. And then James Robinson here, a guy who has been below a 50% snap share in 3 straight games here, looks to potentially be surpassed by his teammate Travis Etienne, but we don't really know how it's going to play out. So for J-Rob, I'm cautiously optimistic here. I think he's still a preferred goal line back for this team, but without getting in the end zone as of late, the production has been pretty shaky. This last tier here is pretty straightforward. Our RB3s, these are guys that I think straight up need a touchdown to produce in this week's games. You'll know about Benjamin again, as always, or not as always, but as we talked through multiple times today. For Kareem Hunt, it's the Nick Chubb show there this year. He's getting usage in spots and spurts, but he is not the most valuable back on this team. And even in PPR, he hasn't been nearly as viable as he was a season ago with that pass-catching utility. So it's touchdown or bust for Hunt. Benjamin playing a top 10 Saints rushing defense against fancy running backs this year. Not trusting that situation too much. I will correct myself. They're a top 10 unit, against opposing fancy running backs, not necessarily the rushing threat. So I think overall, it could be a spotty game for Eno. Like we talked about with all these guys, touchdown dependency is key here. He's going to have to get in the end zone to put up a lineup-worthy game. And then A.J. Dillon, same thing here. Can this Packers offense get inside the 5-yard line? It's a legitimate question at this point in time. Grinding drives out and getting in condensed fields has been a huge problem for them. Their 4th and short offense has been terrible this year. It all hasn't clicked. So you're going to need to see drastic improvement there. You need to see more pass-catching involvement for him. And I think that right now the infrastructure is just not in place for great fantasy games from Dillon like it looked like it would be after week 1. So right now I'm very pessimistic on this overall team, this offense, and the situation for both running backs. And for that reason, he's the RB30 for me and a guy that I really don't like in lineups here. So there you have it, my top 30 running back rankings and tiers here for week 7 fantasy football. If you enjoyed, as always, smash the like button, subscribe to the channel if you're new around here, and I'll see you in a future episode. Go check out our week 7 advice playlist up on the channel right now, and I'll see you there. Peace out.